The chime cut through the cabin like a blade. Not loud, not sharp, just wrong. Heads lifted, screens froze mid-movie. A ripple moved through the rows as the plane drifted in a way that didn't match the smooth hum everyone had settled into. Overhead bins rattled once, then went still. Somewhere up front, a flight attendant stopped walking and gripped the back of a seat. Then the captain's voice came on, careful, measured, tight around the edges. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to ask a specific question. If there are any passengers on board with combat flight experience, please identify yourself to the nearest crew member. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The silence didn't feel empty. It felt held together by breath. A man in seat 8A opened his eyes. Not all the way, just enough to listen. He had been asleep, or something close to it. Head tilted toward the window, cheek resting against the cool plastic, hands loose in his lap. The kind of sleep that comes from long days stacked on longer years. His jacket was plain, his shoes showed wear. Nothing about him asked for attention. The plane shifted again. Just a touch, enough to make a few people grip their armrests. A woman whispered, "Did he say combat?" A nervous laugh floated up from the back, thin and short. The man in 8A inhaled slowly. Then again. His breathing changed before his face did. Slower, focused. Like a door opening somewhere inside him that had stayed shut for a long time. Combat flight experience. He hadn't heard those words spoken out loud in years. The captain didn't add anything else. No details, no comfort. Just that question hanging there. That was when fear moved. Not loud, not wild. It slid through the cabin in small ways. Knees shifting, fingers tightening, eyes darting to strangers, searching for something solid to hold on to. The man in 8A stayed still. He knew the sound of that voice. He knew what wasn't being said. This wasn't turbulence. This wasn't a delay. This was the kind of question you ask when systems stop listening to you. A man 3 rows ahead half stood, then sat back down. Another reached for the call button and froze with his finger hovering. The flight attendants exchanged looks they thought nobody noticed. The plane leveled out, but the air felt thinner. The man in 8A closed his eyes again. Not to sleep, to steady himself. A different cockpit flashed behind his lids, bright panels, hands on controls, the weight of responsibility pressing down, clean and sharp. Back then, fear had rules, procedures, steps you followed until the job was done. The chime sounded again. Same voice. Less space between the words. Time is critical. That was when the sound in the cabin changed. Someone gasped. A baby started crying. A man muttered a prayer under his breath. The man in 8A exhaled through his nose. He thought of 2 kids tucked into the same bed back home. Twins, 8 years old. One of them always stole the blanket. The other pretended she didn't notice the limp when she ran, even though he noticed every time. He thought of a photo on his phone. 2 wide smiles, missing teeth. A marker note taped behind them on the fridge that said, "Come home safe, Dad." He always did, until tonight pressed him. A man farther up the aisle stood and raised his hand. "I'm a pilot," he said, louder than he needed to. "Private license. I fly all the time." Relief rushed through the cabin like warm air. Then it stopped. The flight attendant listened, nodded, then shook her head. "Thank you, sir. Please remain seated." The man sat back down, color draining from his face. The relief drained with it. The man in 8A felt his pulse slow. Because this was his kind. Because he knew what kind of flying this wasn't. He didn't move when the announcement repeated. Didn't look around. Didn't raise his hand. The idea of standing felt heavier than fear. If he stood now, there would be no going back to being unseen. A woman across the aisle leaned toward her husband. "Why won't anyone else get up?" The man in 8A shifted his jaw. His name was Darnell Rowe. He hadn't said it out loud in a while to anyone who needed to know it. He had promised his kids normal, safety, a life where the ground stayed under their feet. But sometimes being a father meant choosing something harder than normal. Before he could talk himself out of it, Before the plane tilted again, he unbuckled his seatbelt. The click sounded loud in his ears. He stood. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. Eyes scanned him, quick and quiet. The clothes, the age, the calm that didn't look like panic. He didn't wave, didn't raise his voice. "I can help," he said. The doubt hit immediately. Someone scoffed near the aisle. Another passenger whispered, "He doesn't look like a pilot." A man in an expensive jacket shook his head like he'd already made up his mind. The flight attendant hesitated. That hesitation cut deeper than fear. Darnell had lived his life in that space. Close enough to listen to, not close enough to trust. He didn't argue. He explained. Short sentences, clear words, no show. He talked about control systems, about what happens when backups start dropping one by one, about why time mattered more than paperwork right now. The cabin leaned in. Fear tightened into attention. A woman a few rows back stood halfway. "Listen to him," she said. "That's how trained people talk." A few heads nodded. Urgency pushed aside comfort. The flight attendant lifted the phone and spoke quietly. Then she looked back at Darnell. "Follow me." As he stepped into the aisle, the man in the expensive jacket muttered something under his breath. Darnell didn't look at him. The cockpit door opened. Then it closed behind him. Inside, the air smelled sharp, burnt. One pilot slumped in his seat, blood on his forehead. Lights flickered across the panel. Warnings blinked without rhythm. Worse than the cabin knew. Darnell took it in without rushing, without stopping. His hands moved where they needed to. His voice stayed even. Outside, the plane dipped. In the cabin, people held their breath. And right here, before the next thing breaks, welcome to Sunshine's home. Drop in the comments where you're watching from and how's the weather over there. I'm curious to know how you're faring because what happens next decides whether this flight ends on the ground or somewhere nobody comes back from. The controls pushed back against Darnell's grip. Heavy, sluggish. Not gone yet, but heading there. Minutes were bleeding away. He hadn't come forward to be seen. He had come forward to finish something. And as the plane tilted again, just enough to make the cabin gasp, one truth settled hard in his chest. If this didn't work, there would be no second chance. And if it did, the cost wouldn't end here. The plane lurched just enough to make the overhead lights flicker. Not a drop, not a fall. A sideways slip that didn't belong at cruising height. Inside the cockpit, Darnell felt it through the floor before the instruments caught up. A slow drift on the attitude display. Numbers hesitating where they should have been steady. The kind of hesitation that meant the plane was thinking too hard about simple things. He planted his feet wider. "Tell me exactly what you lost," he said. The younger pilot, name tag said Caleb Morris, swallowed. His hands were tight on the controls, knuckles pale. "Primary flight computer dropped first, then the secondary. We're running on the last channel and it's lagging. Inputs feel delayed." Delayed was a gentle word. Darnell leaned closer to the panel, eyes moving fast, calm on the surface. He didn't touch anything yet. He watched, listened. Let the plane speak. Outside the cockpit, the cabin felt the change immediately. A cup slid off a tray table and rolled into the aisle. A man cursed under his breath. The baby crying earlier started again, louder this time, sharp and scared. The man in the expensive jacket sat stiff, jaw set, staring straight ahead like looking away might fix something. The intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." No explanation. That made it worse. Back in the cockpit, a warning light blinked, went dark, then blinked again. Not steady, not honest. "How long?" Darnell asked. Caleb shook his head. "Hard to say. Could be minutes. Could be." The plane shifted again. This time, the nose dipped before catching itself. Darnell didn't let his voice change. "Okay, we're not guessing. We're verifying." He checked engine readings, fuel flow, hydraulics. One system at a time, no rushing. Panic wasted time, and time was already running out. Caleb watched him, relief and fear tangled together. You sound like you've done this before. Darnell didn't answer right away, because answering meant admitting something else. Another light came on. Amber. Not red yet. In the cabin, a woman stood up despite the announcement. A flight attendant rushed to her, hand out, voice low. The woman pointed toward the cockpit. Is someone flying the plane or not? The flight attendant didn't answer. She guided the woman back into her seat, smile tight, eyes too focused. The man in the expensive jacket leaned across the aisle. This is ridiculous, he said to anyone listening. They let some random guy up there. We don't even know who he is. A few heads turned away. A few nodded. Fear needed someone to blame. Up front, Darnell felt the controls grow heavier. Not locked, not free, like pushing through wet sand. That's the lag, Caleb said. His voice cracked despite his effort. It's getting worse. Darnell nodded once. I know. He reached for a switch, then stopped. Before we do anything else, when was the last clean response you felt? Caleb thought. A few minutes ago, before the dip. Darnell looked at the display again. The numbers told a story that wasn't finished yet. Listen to me, he said. Right now, the plane is still flying. That means we don't rush it. We don't force it. We keep it steady and buy ourselves space. Caleb nodded, clinging to the sound of certainty. Another announcement echoed through the cabin, shorter this time. Cabin crew, prepare. That was all. The words hit the passengers like cold water. Someone shouted, prepare for what? A man crossed himself. The baby screamed. Darnell felt the weight settle in his chest. He pictured two kids asleep in the same bed, one foot always hanging off the edge. He pushed the image aside. Later, if there was a later. A gauge dipped, then steadied. Barely. Caleb exhaled. It's holding. For now, Darnell said. In the cabin, the woman who had spoken up earlier sat rigid, hands clasped. She stared at the aisle like she expected Darnell to walk back out any second and tell them everything was fine. He didn't. He couldn't. Back in the cockpit, the older captain groaned softly, shifting in his seat. Blood stained the cloth pressed to his forehead. Darnell checked his pulse again. Still there. Still weak. Another warning light flickered, this one tied to control feedback. Darnell's jaw tightened. Caleb, he said, I need you to tell me what you're feeling in the yoke. Caleb tested it gently. Resistance is uneven. It's not matching my inputs. That confirmed it. Darnell straightened. We're losing clean signal. If this channel drops, you'll have nothing but raw response. Caleb's eyes widened. Manual? Yes. Caleb shook his head fast. I've only done that in the simulator. Darnell met his eyes. I know. The plane rolled a degree to the left, corrected late. In the cabin, the expensive jacket man stood up despite the seatbelt sign. This is insane, he snapped. We deserve answers. A flight attendant blocked him, voice firm now. Sir, sit down. He hesitated, then obeyed, anger burning hot on his face. Fear had found a voice. Darnell placed his hand on the edge of the panel. The decision was forming, heavy and clear. He hadn't wanted this. He hadn't come forward to take over. But the plane didn't care about wants. Caleb, he said, we're not waiting for it to fail completely. Caleb swallowed. You mean now? I mean now. The plane shuddered again, longer this time. Outside, the night pressed close against the windows. No horizon, no stars, just black. In the cabin, people felt it all at once. A wave of motion that didn't belong. Someone screamed. Someone else shouted a name. Darnell's hand hovered over the control. This was the line. Once crossed, there was no going back to hoping. He took a breath, and just before he flipped the switch, one last warning flashed, then went dark. The last channel hesitated, and the plane stopped answering the way it should. The switch clicked. Not loud, not dramatic, just a small sound that carried weight. The controls went soft for half a second, then pushed back harder than before more. The plane didn't drop, but it drifted, like it was deciding whether to trust the hands guiding it. Darnell leaned in, shoulders tight, forearms set. He didn't fight the plane. He listened to it. the way he had been trained to listen a lifetime ago when the sky was loud and unforgiving and mistakes were final. Manual response is live, Caleb said, voice thin. We've lost the last channel. Darnell nodded once. Then we fly it the old way. Outside the cockpit, the cabin felt a change instantly. The smooth ride they had paid for was gone. In its place came small corrections, barely visible, but felt in the gut. A sway, a pause, another sway. Drinks trembled in their cups. A few people cried openly now. Others stared straight ahead, eyes wide, waiting for something to happen that they couldn't name. The man in the expensive jacket stood again, fear cracking his anger wide open. "This is out of control," he said. "Who is that guy up there?" Nobody answered him. Fear didn't need a reply. It fed itself. Up front, Darnell's mind stayed clear, even as his arms started to burn. Manual control meant no help, no smoothing, no forgiveness. Every correction came from muscle and judgment alone. "Altitude is holding," Caleb said. "Barely." "Barely is enough," Darnell replied. For now, as he worked, something else pressed in, quiet but heavy. He remembered mornings that started too early. One twin already dressed, the other still asleep, curled tight like she was guarding the last bit of rest she had. He remembered tying shoes one-handed while answering questions about school projects and doctor's visits. He remembered learning to braid hair badly, then better, then well enough that neither of them complained anymore. He had rebuilt his life around keeping things steady, and now the sky was asking him to do the same thing again. The plane lurched, sharper this time. Caleb sucked in a breath. "Darnell!" "I've got it," he said, before the younger man could finish. He eased the yoke, felt the resistance shift, then settle. The plane answered, slow but honest. That was the difference. In the cabin, a woman grabbed the arm of the man beside her. "Are we going to be okay?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. A flight attendant moved through the aisle, voice calm, hands shaking, just enough for a few people to notice. She stopped near the woman who had spoken up earlier, the one who had trusted Darnell's voice. Their eyes met. No words passed between them, but something steady did. Back in the cockpit, a warning tone sounded. Short, sharp, then gone. Caleb looked at the display. "Hydraulics are dropping." Darnell felt it before the numbers confirmed it. The controls grew heavier. Each movement demanded more from him. Sweat ran down his back, cold and fast. "How long?" Caleb asked. Darnell did the math in his head. Distance, speed, what they could afford to lose. "Long enough to make a choice," he said. "Not long enough to wait." Caleb stared at him. "We don't have clearance yet. We don't need permission to stay alive," Darnell said. The words landed hard. In the cabin, the man in the expensive jacket finally sat down, shoulders slumped. His anger had nowhere left to go. All that remained was fear and the sick feeling of being wrong. The intercom clicked on again. "We are diverting," Caleb announced, voice steady by force. "Please remain seated." No destination, no timing, just movement. The plane turned, slow and wide, the kind of turn that told anyone paying attention how little margin was left. Darnell's arms trembled. He ignored it. He thought of the note on the fridge. "Come home safe, Dad." He hadn't promised easy, only safe. As the turn completed, another gauge dipped lower than it should have. Caleb's voice dropped. "We're losing pressure faster now," Darnell nodded, eyes locked forward. "Then we don't waste a second." The runway wasn't in sight yet, and the sky wasn't done testing them. The turn finished slower than Darnell wanted. The plane responded, but it argued first. Every correction came late, like it had to think about whether it felt like obeying. The controls pulled back against his hands, heavy enough now that his shoulders ached with every movement. "Pressure's still falling," Caleb said. He tried to keep his voice level, but it thinned anyway. "Not fast enough to panic, not slow enough to relax. That's how it gets you," Darnell said. "Right in between." Another light blinked on. Not an alarm, a warning. The kind meant to buy time that no longer existed. In the cabin, the change was impossible to miss. The plane no longer felt like it was gliding. It felt worked, like something tired was being forced to keep moving. People shifted in their seats, trying to find comfort where none lived. A man pressed his forehead to the seat in front of him. A woman whispered the same sentence over and over, like it might turn into a shield. The man in the expensive jacket leaned forward, elbows on his knees, face buried in his hands. The anger that had filled him earlier had burned out. What replaced it was smaller, quieter, worse. Fear without pride. A flight attendant passed him and said softly, "Sir, please sit back." He didn't answer. He didn't look up. He just nodded, like a child being told something he already knew. Up front, Darnell adjusted his grip. His forearms burned now, a deep ache that crept into his wrists. Manual flying didn't care how tired you were. It only cared if you stayed sharp. "How far?" Caleb asked. Darnell glanced at the navigation. "Close enough to hope, far enough to work for it." Caleb swallowed. "And if pressure drops below minimum?" "Then we fly until it won't," Darnell said. "And we make it count." The older captain shifted again, a low sound escaping his throat. Darnell checked him once more. Still breathing. Still here. Another responsibility stacked on the rest. Outside, the darkness pressed against the windows. No moon, no stars. Just a thick black that swallowed depth and distance. The plane dipped suddenly, sharper than before. In the cabin, someone screamed. Darnell corrected, muscles straining, teeth clenched just enough to hurt. The plane answered late, then steadied. Sweat dripped from his temple and ran down his jaw. "Hydraulics just took another hit," Caleb said. "We're below comfort." "Comfort isn't the line," Darnell said. "Control is." Caleb nodded, though his hands shook. The intercom crackled again, feedback buzzing for half a second before settling. "Ladies and gentlemen," Caleb said, voice tight but clear, "we're going to need you to stay seated and follow crew instructions exactly." That was it. No promise, no reassurance. Just truth, trimmed down. In the cabin, the woman who had spoken up earlier closed her eyes and took a long breath. The baby finally went quiet, worn out from crying. The plane felt smaller now, closer, every sound louder. Darnell's arms shook again. This time he felt it all the way up into his shoulders. He thought of mornings when he woke up sore from sleeping wrong on the couch after one of the twins had a bad night. He thought of lifting grocery bags and backpacks at the same time, refusing help because there was no one else to take it from. He had trained his body for pressure once. It remembered. A new warning flashed. This one didn't blink. It stayed. Caleb stared at it. That's not good." Darnell didn't look away from the windshield. "No," he said. "It's honest." "How long now?" Darnell did the math again. Shorter this time. "Less than we planned," he said. The plane shuddered, then steadied. The controls felt heavier still, like pushing against thick mud. In the cabin, the expensive jacket man lifted his head. His eyes were red. He looked toward the front of the plane, lips pressed together, something like regret settling in. Fear had finally taught him quiet. Up front, Darnell shifted his stance, feet planted, spine straight. He adjusted his grip one more time, testing the resistance. "This is where it gets real," he said, mostly to himself. Caleb looked at him. "It hasn't been real?" Darnell met his eyes. "This is where hope runs out and work starts." Another dip, another correction. Slower now. The destination was closer, but the plane was getting tired. And Darnell knew with a clarity that settled deep in his chest that the hardest part wasn't behind them. It was waiting. The pressure dropped again. Not enough to trigger chaos. Enough to change the rules. Darnell felt it through the yoke before Caleb finished reading the numbers. The controls didn't just resist now, they pushed back with intent, like the plane was asking him how badly he wanted to keep it straight. "How much time?" Caleb asked. Darnell didn't answer right away. He adjusted trim by feel, not sight, easing the nose just enough to stop the slow drift that had started to creep in. "Less than before," he said finally. Still enough if we don't waste it. Caleb nodded, jaw tight. He wiped his palms on his pants and put his hands back where they belonged. Tell me what you need. Darnell glanced at him. Young, smart, trained, carrying a weight that hadn't been his when the night began. I need you steady, Darnell said, and honest. The second something feels off, you say it. Caleb took a breath. Okay. In the cabin, the plane's labor was impossible to ignore now. Every movement came with a delay. Every correction followed by a pause that made hearts climb into throats. People stopped talking. Even prayers faded into silence. All that remained was the sound of the engines and the low creak of a machine being asked to do more than it wanted to. The man in the expensive jacket sat upright now, hands folded, eyes fixed forward. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked small, like someone who had just realized how little control he'd ever had. A flight attendant knelt beside an older woman, speaking softly. Another checked seatbelts, hands steady by force. Training held them together where fear tried to pull them apart. Up front, a new alert chimed, short, sharp, then gone. Caleb swallowed. Feedback's getting worse. I know, Darnell said. He shifted his weight, bracing through his legs. His shoulders burned. His forearms felt thick and slow, like they belonged to someone else. He ignored it. Pain was just noise if you didn't listen too hard. The navigation display updated. The runway was closer now, still not close enough to touch. Close enough to think about what came next. Approach is going to be rough, Caleb said. We won't have the help we'd normally have. Darnell nodded. Then we don't fly it pretty. We fly it safe. Another dip, this one deeper. In the cabin, a gas rolled through the rows like wind. Someone cried out a name. The baby woke again, thin and tired. Darnell corrected, slow and firm. The plane answered late, then settled. That's all I can give it, he said. Anything harder, and we lose more than we gain. Caleb stared at the instruments. Hydraulics are nearing minimum. Darnell exhaled through his nose. Then we don't ask for more. Silence filled the cockpit, heavy but focused. The kind of silence where every sound mattered. Darnell's mind drifted for half a second, uninvited. Two kids at the kitchen table, homework spread out. One twin watching the other's pencil move, waiting for help she wouldn't ask for. Darnell standing over them, coffee gone cold, pretending he wasn't tired. He pushed the image away. Now wasn't for remembering. Now was for finishing. Cabin's going to feel this, Caleb said, watching the numbers. They already do, Darnell replied. He reached up and adjusted a setting by touch, not sight. The plane shuddered, then steadied again. Each correction cost more now. Every movement drained something that wouldn't come back. In the cabin, the woman who had spoken up earlier squeezed her eyes shut. The man beside her took her hand without asking. Around them, strangers leaned closer to strangers, pulled together by the simple fact of sharing the same risk. The intercom crackled. Final approach in progress, Caleb announced. The words landed like a weight. Darnell's arms trembled openly now. He didn't hide it. There was no one left to impress. How far? Caleb asked quietly. Darnell checked once more. Close enough that we commit. And if there is no if, Darnell said. Not sharp, just final. Once we line up, we don't go around. Caleb's eyes widened. I mean we put it down, Darnell said. However it comes. The runway lights appeared ahead, faint at first, then clearer. A thin line of certainty in a sea of dark. Darnell locked his gaze forward. The controls pushed back harder than ever, like the plane was testing him one last time. He pushed through, and as the aircraft began its descent toward the lights, a final warning flashed. One that told him the margin he'd been holding on to was almost gone. He tightened his grip, because whatever happened next, there would be no room left to hesitate. The nose dipped without warning. Not a fall, a sag, the kind that steals air from lungs before the mind can catch up. Darnell tightened his grip and pulled back, slow and firm, muscles straining as the yoke pushed against him, like it didn't want to listen anymore. The plane answered late, then steadied just enough to stop the alarms from screaming. Hydraulics just crossed the line, Caleb said, eyes locked on the panel. We're under minimum. Darnell didn't look away from the dark ahead. Then we stopped asking for more. Another tremor ran through the frame, a long shiver that rattled the cockpit glass. Somewhere behind them, a woman cried out. The sound carried forward through the thin walls like a reminder of who was counting on these hands not to slip. Darnell set his feet wider, grounding himself. Sweat ran into his eyes. He blinked it away. Talk to me, he said. What's still honest? Caleb scanned fast. Engines are good. Fuel's fine. Control response is weak, but still there. We lose any more pressure and we won't have room to correct, Darnell finished. The plane drifted left. He corrected. It drifted back. He corrected again. Each move cost more than the last. In the cabin, the change hit hard. Seatbacks creaked. Loose items slid. A man shouted for everyone to sit down, voice cracking. A flight attendant braced herself in the aisle, one hand gripping a headrest, the other stretched out like she could hold the plane steady by force alone. The man in the expensive jacket squeezed his eyes shut. He whispered something that sounded like an apology, though no one answered. Up front, a new light came on, steady, bright, unforgiving. Caleb's voice dropped. Backup reservoir is draining faster than projected. Darnell nodded once. Then, we don't plan for later. Caleb turned toward him. What does that mean? It means we bring it in sooner, Darnell said. And we don't wait for perfect. Another jolt, stronger this time. Darnell leaned into it, arms burning, jaw set. The plane answered, slow and stubborn, but it answered. Approach lights should be visible soon, Caleb said, trying to sound hopeful. Soon is a wide word, Darnell said. Keep your eyes sharp. The captain in the left seat groaned again, shifting weakly. Darnell checked him with one hand, never letting go of the yoke with the other. Still breathing, still alive. Outside, the darkness thinned just a little, a hint of something ahead. Not the runway yet, just the idea of it. In the cabin, the woman who had trusted Darnell's voice earlier leaned forward, knuckles white, eyes fixed on the aisle. Around her, strangers held hands without asking. Nobody spoke now. Fear had gone quiet. The plane shuddered again, longer than before. Caleb sucked in a breath. We just lost another chunk of pressure. Darnell felt it immediately. The controls grew heavy, almost dead weight in his hands. He adjusted trim inch by inch, feeling for any response the plane was still willing to give. Listen, Darnell said, voice calm by choice. If it starts to go, don't fight it fast. Slow inputs only. We ride what it gives us. Caleb nodded, eyes wide but focused. Understood. A warning tone chirped, then cut off. The panel looked tired, like it had done all it could. The plane drifted again. Darnell corrected. Too slow this time. The angle deepened. Darnell, Caleb started. I see it, Darnell said. He pulled harder, shoulders screaming. The yoke moved, grudging and thick. The nose came up just enough to stop the slide. In the cabin, a sharp cry cut through the silence, followed by sobbing. A flight attendant shouted, Stay seated! Her voice shook, but it held. Darnell's arms trembled openly now. He didn't hide it. There was no strength left to spare on pride. How far? He asked. Caleb checked again. Closer than before. Still not close. Darnell exhaled slowly. Then we keep it together. Another tremor rolled through the plane, a deep vibration that rattled bones. Darnell felt something give. Not fully, but enough to matter. Pressure's almost gone, Caleb said. We're running on what's left. Darnell's mind narrowed to the present. No past, no later. Just now. He thought of his kids for a second too long and pushed it away. Thinking about them made his chest tighten. He needed every bit of air where it was. The approach lights flickered into view at last. Dim, distant, real. There, Caleb said, voice breaking. I see them. Darnell locked onto the glow. That's our line. We don't lose it. The plane dipped again, harder this time. In the cabin, someone screamed his name without knowing it. Darnell corrected, slower than instinct demanded. The plane answered barely. Hold, he muttered. Just hold. The runway lights sharpened, stretching out like a promise that came with conditions. Gear status? Darnell asked. Caleb checked, hands shaking. Down, locked. Good, Darnell said. That's one thing we don't argue with. Another warning flashed, then stayed on. Caleb swallowed. This is it. Darnell nodded. I know. He lined them up, tiny adjustments burning through his arms. The plane fought him every inch. The controls felt like they might freeze at any second. In the cabin, the man in the expensive jacket lifted his head. Tears ran down his face. He didn't wipe them away. The plane dropped lower. Altitude, Caleb called out. Darnell acknowledged with a grunt. Every muscle focused on keeping the nose steady. The runway filled the windshield now. Too fast, too heavy. We're coming in hot, Caleb said. I know, Darnell replied. We don't have room to slow. The plane shook, a violent rattle that felt like it might tear something loose. Darnell held the line. Get ready, he said. This is going to be rough. The ground rushed up. The margin vanished. And just before the wheels met concrete, the controls went even heavier in his hands, telling him the plane had almost nothing left to give. If you're still with us right now, this is the moment to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next part of this story or another one that might inspire you when you least expect it. And if this chapter hit you, share your thoughts in the comments and let others know they're not alone. Because what happens next decides everything, and there is no room left for mistakes. The wheels hit hard enough to steal breath, not a bounce, a slam that shook the frame and sent a violent jolt through everybody on board. The sound ripped through the cabin like metal tearing on stone. Overhead, the bins rattled. Someone screamed. Someone else shouted a name that disappeared into noise. Darnell pulled back, slow and steady, refusing the urge to react fast. Fast would break what little control they still had. The yoke fought him, stiff and stubborn, like it was glued in place. Reverse, Caleb shouted. Darnell pushed the levers forward with everything left in his arms. Nothing. For half a second, nothing happened. The runway rushed at them, lights blurring past too fast, the end coming up like a wall that didn't care how hard anyone prayed. Again, Darnell said, teeth clenched. Caleb slammed the control a second time. The engines roared back at last, a deep, angry sound that rattled the cockpit glass. The plane shuddered, tires screaming as rubber burned against concrete. The force threw everyone forward, seatbelts biting into skin. In the cabin, bodies lurched. A man hit his head against the seat in front of him. A flight attendant was thrown to her knees, hands gripping the aisle carpet as she fought to stay upright. The man in the expensive jacket cried out, not in anger now, but in raw fear. He clutched the armrests, knuckles white, eyes wide and wet. Brakes, Caleb said, voice high with strain. Darnell pressed down hard. The response was weak, too weak. We don't have full pressure, Caleb said. I know, Darnell replied. The end of the runway came closer. Faster than it should have. Darnell leaned forward, putting his weight into the brakes like it might help. His arms burned. His legs shook. Every muscle screamed at once. Come on, he muttered, not to the plane, not to himself, but to whatever was listening. The deceleration was uneven, a violent pull, then a slip. The plane swerved slightly left. In the cabin, screams rose again. Someone shouted to hold on. Someone else sobbed openly. Darnell corrected with what little steering he had left, slow and careful, refusing to overdo it. The plane straightened, shaking like it might give up any second. Speed? He asked. Caleb checked, breath hitching. Dropping. Not fast enough. The runway lights blurred less now. The roar of the engines filled everything. The smell of burned rubber crept into the cockpit. Darnell kept his foot down, jaw locked, eyes fixed ahead. The distance markers rushed past. 2,000 feet. 1,000. The brakes screamed, a sharp sound that made Darnell's teeth ache. The plane shuddered again, then slowed, just enough to matter. Come on, Caleb whispered. 800 feet. 600. The nose dipped as the plane fought the last of its momentum. Darnell held steady, refusing to let it drift. 400, 200. The plane slowed to a crawl, then rolled another few feet before finally stopping. Silence hit hard. Not quiet, empty, no engine roar, no screams. Just the sound of breathing. Heavy, shaky, real. Darnell stayed frozen for a second, hands still locked on the yoke, chest heaving. His arms felt like they might fall off. His legs trembled. "We're stopped," Caleb said, disbelief cracking his voice. "We're stopped." Darnell closed his eyes for half a second. Just half. Then he opened them. In the cabin, it took a moment for people to understand what had happened. A few sobs broke the silence. Then more. Then laughter, sharp and shaky. Strangers grabbed each other, hugging without asking, crying into shoulders they'd never seen before tonight. The man in the expensive jacket sat frozen, staring forward, tears running freely now. He didn't wipe them away. He didn't look away. A flight attendant pushed herself up from the aisle, knees shaking, and laughed through tears. "We're down," she said to no one and everyone. "We're down." Up front, Darnell finally let go of the yoke. His hands wouldn't open at first. Caleb looked at him, eyes red. "You did it." Darnell shook his head slowly. "We did." Outside, emergency lights washed the runway in red and white. Vehicles raced toward them, sirens wailing, a blur of motion and sound. Darnell looked at the panel again. Dead lights, dead systems. Nothing left to give. They hadn't had a second to spare. In the cabin, applause started somewhere near the back. It spread fast, clapping mixed with crying. Gratitude pouring out in waves. Darnell didn't turn around. He leaned back slowly, every joint protesting, and stared straight ahead. Because landing wasn't the end. Not yet. He still had to face the people who had doubted him. Still had to walk out of this plane. Still had one call left to make. And as the cockpit door began to open and voices rushed in, one thought settled heavy and clear in his chest. Surviving the landing was only part of what this night would take from him. The cockpit door swung open, and voices rushed in all at once. Questions, shouts, orders, relief spilling out too fast to organize. Darnell stayed seated. His hands rested on his thighs now, fingers curled, refusing to fully relax. His arms shook when he tried to move them. Sweat cooled on his skin, leaving a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. A paramedic leaned in. "Sir, are you hurt?" Darnell shook his head once. "Check the captain first." They moved past him, careful and quick. The injured pilot was lifted gently, straps clicking, commands spoken in short, practiced phrases. The sound of boots and equipment filled the cockpit, replacing the silence that had nearly swallowed it moments ago. Caleb stood there, unsure what to do with himself now that the work was done. His hands hovered in the air, like they still expected resistance from the controls. "You good?" Darnell asked. Caleb nodded, then shook his head, then nodded again. "I think so." Darnell understood that answer better than words could explain. Outside, the cabin was alive with sound, crying, laughing, people talking over each other, telling the same story again and again just to prove it was real. A flight attendant leaned against a seat and slid down into it, covering her face as her shoulders shook. The man in the expensive jacket stood slowly, legs unsteady. He looked toward the front of the plane, eyes searching, full of something that hadn't been there before. When he saw Darnell through the open door, he stopped. He didn't speak. He just nodded. Darnell met his eyes for a moment, then looked away. There was no victory in it, no satisfaction, just weight settling where anger might have been. An airline official stepped into the cockpit, voice firm but careful. "Sir, we're going to need to debrief you." Darnell finally pushed himself up from the seat. His legs protested, nearly buckling before he caught himself on the edge of the panel. "In a minute," he said. "I need a phone." The official hesitated, then nodded. "Of course." As Darnell stepped into the aisle, the cabin shifted again. Not from motion this time, but from attention. Conversations softened. People turned. Some reached out, hands brushing his sleeve, his arm like they needed to touch proof. A woman pressed something into his hand, a small cross. He closed his fingers around it without looking. "Thank you," someone whispered. "Thank you," another voice echoed. Darnell didn't stop walking. At the front of the cabin, he paused, breathing slow, steadying himself the same way he had done hours earlier. The plane was quiet enough now to hear his own heartbeat. He took out his phone. The screen was dark. He pressed the button again. A crack in the glass caught the light, but the screen flickered on. 1% battery. Enough for one call. The phone rang once, twice. "Dad?" A sleepy voice answered, soft and unsure. Darnell closed his eyes. "I'm here," he said. His voice held, even when his chest didn't. "I'm okay." A pause, then relief poured through the line, warm and shaking. "Grandma said something was wrong with the plane." "There was," Darnell said, "but everyone's safe." Another pause. "Did you help?" Darnell swallowed. "Yeah, I helped." "I knew you would," the voice said, simple and certain. His chest tightened, hard enough to hurt. He leaned against the wall and let it. "I'm coming home," he said. "We'll be waiting," the voice replied. The line went quiet. Darnell lowered the phone, staring at the screen until it went dark again. Around him, the cabin buzzed with movement as doors opened and cold air rushed in. Emergency crews guided passengers toward the exits. The night outside looked different now, wider, real. As Darnell stepped toward the open door, the airline official spoke again. "Sir, there are people outside. Media. Questions." Darnell stopped. He looked out at the flashing lights, the waiting crowd, the moment that wanted to turn him into something loud and public. Then he looked down at his hands. They were still shaking. "Not tonight," he said, and as he placed one foot on the stairs leading down to the tarmac, he felt it clearly. The world was about to decide who he was, and he wasn't sure yet how much of himself he was willing to give. Cold air hit his face the second his foot touched the tarmac. Sharp, clean, real. Darnell drew in a breath and felt it all the way down to his chest, like his lungs were reminding him what living felt like. The night wrapped around the plane in flashing red and white, emergency lights cutting across the concrete in fast, restless strokes. Sirens wailed nearby, then faded as crews took control. Behind him, passengers stepped down the stairs slowly, some clinging to railings, others clinging to each other. A woman dropped to her knees the moment her feet hit the ground. A man laughed too loud, then broke down halfway through the sound. Darnell moved off to the side, giving space, giving distance. He had done what he came to do. Now his body wanted to shut down, piece by piece. A paramedic approached again. "Sir, we really need to check you." "I'm okay," Darnell said. His voice sounded steady, but his legs told a different story. The paramedic studied him, then nodded. "Sit anyway." Darnell sat on the edge of the stairs, elbows resting on his knees, head bowed for a moment. His hands shook in the open air. No cockpit walls, no controls to hold on to. Just him in the aftermath. Across the tarmac, the man in the expensive jacket stood apart from the others. His coat hung open, forgotten. His face looked older now, smaller. When his eyes met Darnell's again, he didn't look away. He walked over. Each step seemed hard for him. When he stopped in front of Darnell, he opened his mouth, then closed it. Tried again. "I was wrong," he said finally. His voice cracked. "About everything." Darnell looked up at him, tired eyes meeting tired eyes. "I know," Darnell said. The man nodded, shame settling in his shoulders. "Thank you," he added, quieter this time. Darnell didn't answer. He didn't need to. The man stepped back, giving space, carrying something different with him now. An airline official approached with a clipboard, questions lined up and ready. "Sir, the company wants to—" Darnell raised a hand. Not sharp, just firm. "Later." The official hesitated, then nodded. "Of course." Nearby, a camera light flicked on, then another. Voices called out, names he hadn't given, labels he hadn't asked for. Darnell stood slowly, every muscle protesting. He turned away from the lights and walked a few steps toward the edge of the tarmac, where the noise thinned and the night opened up. He thought of his kids again, one always asking too many questions, the other listening more than she spoke, both of them believing, without doubt, that their father would always come back. He had. But the cost of that promise sat heavy in his chest now. A crew member jogged over. "Sir," she said, breathless, "they're asking if you'll speak. Just a few words." Darnell closed his eyes. Just a few words could turn into something that followed him forever. He looked back at the plane, at the scorch marks on the runway, at the passengers still filling out, still shaking, still alive. Then he looked at the phone in his hand. Dead screen. No battery. No connection to the only voices that mattered. "Not tonight," he said again. He took another step away from the lights, and that was when a uniformed officer called out his name, loud and clear, cutting through the noise. "Sir, we need you over here." Darnell stopped. He didn't turn around right away, because he knew what came next would decide more than headlines. It would decide what kind of life waited for him after this night. "Sir." The word landed firm, steady, impossible to ignore. Darnell turned slowly. The officer wasn't aggressive, not rushed, just doing his job in a world that had almost come apart an hour ago. Behind him stood airline staff, medics, and a few people with badges clipped to their jackets. Further back, the camera lights waited, hungry and patient. "We need a formal statement," the officer said, "just to close the loop." Darnell nodded once. He understood loops. He understood closure. He followed them a few steps away from the noise, to a quieter stretch of concrete where the lights didn't glare as hard. His legs still felt weak. His hands still shook when he clenched them. They asked simple questions. Name, background, what happened in the cockpit. Darnell answered without decoration, without drama, short sentences, clear facts. He kept his voice even, the same way he had kept it in the air. He didn't say more than he needed to. When one of them asked why he stood up when no one else did, Darnell paused. He thought of two small beds pushed together, of shoes by the door, of a note on a fridge written in marker. "I had something to come back to," he said. That was all. No one pushed him after that. The questions ended. The officer thanked him. The airline official nodded with something like respect. The cameras waited for a soundbite that never came. Darnell walked away. He passed the man in the expensive jacket one last time. The man didn't speak. He just lowered his head. Darnell nodded back. Nothing more was needed. As buses pulled up to carry passengers inside, a woman broke away from the crowd and approached him, the one who had spoken up in the cabin, the one who had trusted his voice when it mattered. "You reminded me," she said softly, "that calm is a kind of strength." Darnell gave a small smile. "It's the only kind I had left." She thanked him and rejoined the others. The tarmac grew quieter. The plane sat still now, dark and harmless, like it couldn't believe what it had just survived. Darnell stood alone for a moment, hands in his jacket pockets, breathing in the cold night air. The shaking in his arms finally slowed. His heart settled into a rhythm that felt like his own again. He thought about the sky, how it had taken something from him years ago, how it had asked for it back tonight, how it hadn't won. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt tired and grateful. Later inside the terminal, he borrowed a charger from a stranger. His phone came back to life slowly, like it needed time to trust the world again. Messages flooded in, missed calls, news alerts. He ignored all of it. He opened his photos instead. Two kids, one smiling wide, the other leaning close, careful with her weight. Both of them safe, both of them waiting. He typed one message, "Landing now, I'm okay, I'm coming home." He hit send. Outside the window, dawn crept up behind the clouds, thin and quiet, like it didn't want to wake anyone too fast. Light spilled across the runway, softening the marks left behind. Darnell watched it for a long time. He understood something now that he hadn't before. He hadn't left the sky because he was afraid. He had left because love asked him to. And tonight, love had asked him to stand up again. He gathered his things and walked toward his next flight. Toward home. Toward two kids who would never fully know how close he came to not making it back, and never needed to. Because some stories aren't meant to be told loudly. They're meant to be lived quietly. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of someone you love or something you've carried, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss another story that brings hope, strength, and meaning. Share your thoughts in the comments and let your words inspire someone else who might be holding on through a hard night. Because sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is make it home.